And welcome to Telewizja Republika. Today, we begin with some updates from the battleground of Ukraine's fight against Putin's Russia before we move to the US presidential campaign. Ukrainian forces reportedly struck a Russian airfield in the Volgograd region, targeting fuel and bomb warehouses at Marinovka airbase. The attack, carried out with drones, caused several explosions and fires, as confirmed by a source within Ukraine's security service. The Kyiv Independent reported that this airbase has been used to bomb Ukrainian front lines. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky visited the border area in Sumy Oblast, announcing the capture of new settlement in Russia's Kursk region. According to Institute for the Study of War, the Ukrainian army is making stable but marginal advances in its operation. Zelensky stated that Ukrainian forces have also captured Russian prisoners during this operation. Meanwhile, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz revealed that Kyiv prepared its Kursk counter-offensive very secretly, without informing or consulting Germany on this matter. You know what? Maybe that's the reason why it was actually successful, or it is successful. Sorry for the sarcasm. Shifting focus to the United States, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz accepted the Democratic vice presidential nomination at the penultimate day of Democratic National Convention. His selection has sparked controversy, with 50 GOP lawmakers who are military veterans condemning Walz for alleged misrepresentations of his military service. We will talk about the ongoing DNC with our guest, Professor Mark Strand, in a couple of minutes. According to a report from Notice, a Washington publication from Arbitron Journalism Institute, former President Donald Trump delayed two major policy announcements, planning instead to unveil them after the Democratic National Convention concludes. A copy of his planned speech, reportedly obtained by the publication, reveals that these proposals included a nationwide felony for providing gender transition to minors without parental consent and seeking of the death penalty for child abusers. Finally, Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton has launched an investigation into reports that non-citizens are being illegally registered to vote. Paxton emphasized that such actions are crimes under Texas law, with severe penalties for those who found guilty. You can join us on rackracon.com. That's our website. You can leave us your email. You can drop us a line or two. You can leave us your email. We'll get back to you with our reports on the ongoing war against the Western civilization. You can also click subscribe button on our YouTube channel. You can find us on Telewizja Republika. My name is Michał Rachon. This is RFK, and we roll in. Professor Mark Strand is on Telewizja Republika again. You can join Professor Strand on his Substack, Politics and Sausage Making. Great to have you again on our program. Professor, what is the situation of the American presidential campaign right now? Last time we talked, it seems that the situation was much less complicated than it is now.
It sure was. Last time we talked, Joe Biden was dropping in the polls and Donald Trump was surging, and it was almost becoming a fait accompli that Donald Trump was going to win. Then came the debate, which I still think that Joe Biden must be very mad at whoever scheduled the debate so early, because had he not done that debate, he would have been giving a speech tonight accepting the Democratic nomination. So a lot's changed. Obviously, the big thing has been Kamala Harris, who is taken over. The interesting thing, she has never won a single Democratic primary vote. Either when she ran in 2020, she dropped out before the first primary, and she got the nomination right now after all the primaries had taken place. So she's not very tested, but to her advantage right now, she's not Donald Trump. Donald Trump just has a lot of negatives. And it's changed the race. I mean, the Democrats have had a very successful convention. The Republicans did too. I mean, to a large degree, these are kind of infomercials for both parties, where they're putting their young people forward and everything else. And what the nice thing about the convention's proved is that both parties have a deep bench of younger people who are going to come up in another 4 years. But the Democrats so far have been keeping their convention mostly on feelings without a lot of specifics. You've not heard anyone talk about foreign policy at all at the Democrat National Committee convention. So it'll be interesting what Harris does tonight. This is her big night. She has the big speech. It'll be the biggest audience she's ever had in her life. And a lot's riding on the line. It's a first impression for a lot of people. So I think the race is dramatic. Probably, there's been a surge for Harris. And most of that, I think, is Democratic enthusiasm from those people who were kind of depressed about how Biden was doing.
So didn't it change, at least for now, the dynamics of this campaign from a kind of comparison between two former presidents who each of them had one term. Donald Trump had one term and Joe Biden had one term. So people in a way were choosing between those two visions, and Kamala Harris, who is a vice president right now, but as you just mentioned, she didn't run an office and she didn't have all the responsibility that comes with such a high position. So is it the nature of this campaign right now is pro or against Trump? Is that what we are witnessing right now?
I think right now that's what it is. Now it's up to Trump to change that, to make sure, because you also, another word you don't hear at the Democratic convention is President Biden. So they've been trying to distance themselves, almost like trying to make Donald Trump the incumbent that Harris is running against. She keeps saying, on day one, I'm going to do this. Well, her day one was 3.5 years ago, and they haven't done much. So Trump's obligations to tie her to Biden's policies on inflation, the border, crime, stability in the world, and say, you've been there the whole time, what have you done? Harris, to the opposite, is going to try to run against Trump, particularly on the abortion issue. That seems to be her big issue. She's come up with some economic issues that are kind of squirrely, like wage and price controls, accusing grocery stores of gouging prices, which is very hard to do in an industry where the profit margin is only about 1.5%. She's talking about giving $25,000 to first-time home buyers, which, of course, increases the price of houses by $25,000.
As it always does.
And other economic programs like this, taxing unrealized capital gains, so in people's retirement accounts. They haven't received the money yet, but they're going to pay taxes on the paper gains. So these are things that if Trump raises, I think he will meet with a great deal of success. Harris wants to avoid that. She wants to make it about Donald Trump, about him being weird, or about him being too concerned about himself. And to a certain degree, Trump has allowed that to happen.
Why we all remember the words that were widely quoted all around the world about Donald Trump being a showman who may lose the election, according to one of the highest figures of the Republican movement in the U.S. right now.
Well, right now, he is a showman, sometimes to his advantage, sometimes not. He's got to realize that he can't win it with just his base voters. He needs to win over independents who are hurting financially, who did better when he was president, people who are upset about the southern border, especially working class people. This is where he's made great inroads amongst Hispanic and Black men, much more than the typical Republican, because they're the ones who are most vulnerable to entry-level jobs coming in and taking their work. So he can do it. It requires discipline. And this is not a word you normally associate with Donald Trump. The other thing, too, is this is very early in American presidential elections. The polls are very close. But at this point, Barack Obama was trailing Mitt Romney by 7 points. And George W. Bush was losing to John Kerry. And you'll see that right now, everything's going to be settled now, with the possible exception of tomorrow's potential event. And by Labor Day, that's when you start really watching the polls. And of course, in American elections, you don't watch the national polls, you watch the state-by-state polls.
So what is the meaning of the upcoming, as we speak, we do not know the substance, the message of the announcement or presser of Mr. Kennedy, which is an independent candidate. How did the switch of Democratic candidates influenced Kennedy's campaign, and how his expected decision will impact or influence the race between Harris and Trump?
Yeah, he had a great campaign. Obviously, the nephew of the assassinated president, the son of an assassinated presidential candidate. And he was doing very well in the very beginning, particularly when you had this group of people who didn't like either candidate. And they're being forced to choose between two candidates they didn't like. Democrats didn't like Biden, Republicans didn't like Trump, and independents were a lot of those people. And so he was doing better then. Once Biden dropped out, a lot of those Democrats who were supporting him went home. And this is part of what you see in the surge in Harris's voters, is that a lot of the Kennedy voters who are going to vote for him that were Democrats switched. What remains are probably the ones who are more likely to lean Republican. Now, that's a much smaller number. He was up to 15% or more earlier. Now he's probably about 5%. But in this election, 5% might make a huge difference, particularly in states like Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin, where Kennedy polls fairly well. So if he does drop out and endorse Donald Trump tomorrow, I expect it to be a marginal help. And it's not going to swing the entire election by itself, but I wouldn't be surprised if Trump suddenly pulls slightly ahead or further ahead in some of these swing states than he is now.
So does it mean most of our viewers are not U.S. Citizens? It means that his votes can influence those battleground states that you just mentioned in this long term, in the perspective of November?
Yeah, I think that's exactly true. There are about 7 states. As you know, the United States doesn't have one big national election. We have 50 local elections all on the same day because we vote in the Electoral College by state. So each state's votes count independently, which is a great thing for smaller states because otherwise the candidates would ignore them altogether. So in the 7 states are really in play. Arizona, Nevada, North Carolina, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And if Harris has to win at least Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, or she can't get to 270 votes in the Electoral College. So that's a big test. One of the reasons Republicans were very relieved that Harris did not pick Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, as their vice presidential running mate. And if you got a chance to see his speech last night, which is probably the middle of the night for you, it was very powerful. Very patriotic, very powerful. And I sat there saying, phew, thank goodness they didn't nominate her.
That's very interesting because there is a very, at least that's the way it looks from the perspective of this side of the Atlantic, there is a reason for which Shapiro wasn't picked. And it looks like it was I would say, politically incorrect reason.
That's right. He was Jewish, and he's a very strong supporter of Israel. And the Democrat Party has this pro-Hamas problem right now. They're having big demonstrations outside their convention, and it's very anti-Semitic. And the biggest problem they will have with that vote is it's a very large Muslim population in states like Michigan and Wisconsin, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Detroit, Michigan, and even in states like Nevada, which would have made it even more difficult for Harris to consolidate her base. So they went with Tim Walz, who was perhaps one of the most liberal governors in the United States.
Yeah, but this is actually the first time we are discussing the issue and the big problem of, at least that's the way I view it, something that we didn't actually see in such an obvious manner. The Islamic population of Democratic voters, because of their anti-Semitism, is so powerful right now that Democrats had to drop very good Jewish candidate because it could hurt the person that is at the top of the ticket. Is that
right?
The case?
And it's very troubling because you're right. This is a fairly new phenomenon. And there's always been incidents of anti-Semitism, but very small and isolated. This has become a political movement that is shaping the Democratic Party.
I mean,
I think it's one of the reasons why
as mainstream as you can get. I mean, it's incredible in a way.
And the funny thing is, of course, that the Jewish vote has been a very loyal Democratic part of the Democratic coalition. And so all of a sudden they're saying, what happened to my party? And I think to a large degree, this is going to help Donald Trump also, not just, in a lot of ways. So it'll be very interesting, to see how that vote shapes out. Trump is making inroads into groups that Republicans typically haven't done. I mean, we used to be the party of the wealthy. And now that the Republicans are the party of the working class. And
this is another phenomenon. As we're talking about it, I haven't been to Chicago. I didn't see the Democratic convention, but I was 3 weeks ago in U.S. I was in Milwaukee. I saw the Jewish community supporting Donald Trump, and I've been a couple of days ago in New Jersey, and I saw the Bedminster golf club event and one of the fundraisers that was obviously attended by a certain, quite a big Jewish community, and it looks like we are having a kind of a switch. On one hand, this kind of switch, and on the other hand, very interesting. And could you explain what is the reason for which? I believe it was Michelle Obama who said that the part of the job that the job that Donald Trump is applying to is a black job. And it is also very interesting because it seems like it is a message for the black voters: do not vote for Donald Trump, because apparently Donald Trump is trying to get those votes and he's quite successful in it.
Yeah, it's part of the problem with black voters. They've taken it for granted for so long. I remember when I was working for a U.S. senator, he spent millions of dollars trying to get the black vote in St. Louis, and then Hurricane Katrina came, and he's still only got 5%. I mean, that's how dramatic the Democratic coalition has controlled that. But to a large degree, I think they feel rather neglected or just taken for granted. And particularly the movement amongst black men is changing. That they want to support their families. They want good jobs. They want an education. You have a place like Minnesota, I'll use an example because of Walz being there, is that their education system was suffering dramatically, but then they closed the schools during the pandemic, and now grades have fallen another 10%. I mean, if you are a student in an inner city school, you start out with 2 strikes against you, trying to compete against the rest of the economy. Yeah. And I think a lot of people now are finally just frustrated with that and say, well, who has an answer? Who's going to do a better job? And again, this is a group that Trump, if he stays disciplined, his point was that black unemployment was the lowest it's ever been during his presidency. And it actually was, statistically. And of course, she's saying, well, he's talking about black jobs. Well, yeah, he's talking about the effect of the economy on, minority groups that struggle to get ahead. So I'm not sure that's going to work. Michelle Obama tried to do that, and I think she had a huge appeal to those people in that audience. Because that's her people. And a lot of them would have rather seen her run than Kamala Harris.
Yeah, that's another very interesting issue, very interesting question. What is the reason for which they did not make this kind of decision? I don't know if it was even possible. I assume that the money regulations had something to do with it, but that's an open question. Professor, my final question. As we are watching, and our viewers are very interested in the geopolitical developments in Central Europe during the Russian war against Ukraine, and it was, since the very beginning of this Russian attack against Ukraine, one of those political issues very important from the standpoint of differences between Democrats and Republicans in the United States. What is the meaning of this aspect in those remaining almost 80 days of U.S. presidential campaign?
It's very interesting because the Democrats are kind of ignoring the foreign policy question. They'll talk about Ukraine some, but Israel has become a real mess for them. And you could make the case, and Donald Trump does, that the reason why Russia invaded Ukraine was largely because he watched what happened in the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, and that factored into his thinking that the Americans wouldn't react. So Trump is trying to make this an issue, stability in the world. He started no new wars. He makes the case that Putin would never have invaded Ukraine if he had been president, that China won't invade Taiwan if he's president. And so far, the Democrats are saying nothing about that. I mean, Harris does not have much foreign policy experience other than attending funerals overseas. And Walz has, of course, been a governor, so he doesn't really have foreign policy experience either. So it will be a bigger issue. And you know, something we talked about last time, I think, was President Duda's visit with Donald Trump. Do you notice his language on Ukraine has changed ever since?
Is that
he actually praised?
We know, and we kind of saw this from the perspective of Poland. But that's very interesting that you are actually raising this observation, because our views, Polish views, are totally different, as you know, and as our viewers know. That, for example, the Hungarian viewers and also our assessment of Trump's policy towards Russia are really different that most of the supporters of Donald Trump may think. We generally in Central Europe think that he was running a very effective policy containing Russia's influence in this part of the world, which is not very often raised on your side of Atlantic Ocean. But go on, that's very interesting.
No, I think that Trump is trying to raise that, but his language about Zelensky has changed. He's trying to make the point that, yes, he thinks he can negotiate this, but if Putin doesn't cooperate, then he may just come out and support Ukraine even stronger or take down these barriers. One of the sad things is we don't quite know who's running American foreign policy right now. We have to assume it's a combination of the military, State Department, CIA. Someone's telling these countries that don't take advantage of us because the president seems to be vulnerable. You know, so there's some communication going on, but that's a slow process when you run things by committees. And you notice the United States is always behind when it comes to giving Ukraine permission to use the weapons most effectively that they can use. I think Americans are watching with great interest Ukraine's invasion into Russia to see what that's going to mean. I don't think we know yet. Our military seems to have been very surprised by it, which was probably a smart decision by the Ukrainians. You know, ask forgiveness instead of permission. You know,
that's a very good explanation of the question that we ask ourselves here in this part of the world. What's the reason for which the Russian military defense high figures couldn't connect and couldn't get through with Pentagon? Well, maybe because on the other side of the phone line, there was no one really who could give direct and fast answers. So it's better not to answer this kind of calls and see and wait what the result of the Kursk offensive is going to be. Your take, your assessments of what this incursion offensive, what Ukraine is doing right now in Russia may affect before we go?
Well, you know, obviously, I think it's improved the morale of Ukrainian troops who've been under a lot of pressure for a year. They've struggled with the situation, and it's been a tough year for them, right? The summer offensive failed, and so I think to a large degree this boosts their morale. And the second thing is, you figure Ukraine has some idea of they're getting leverage for something. Is this for negotiations? Is this for more prisoners exchanges? Is this just to embarrass Putin and drive him out of his mind? Will he move a whole lot of troops eventually out of some key area to try to crush this? They've got to be careful not to get cut off. But right now, it looks like they're not. So, God bless them.
As we often remind in this show, it's not the same Kursk offensive that we used to think of based on lessons of history in Second World War, but still one of the most interesting.
It can't be good for Putin, who already has a lot of mothers and wives who have lost people, to see German tanks.
It's not that he really cares, but yeah, it could be at some point.
But to see German tanks on Russian soil, that's got to affect public opinion to a degree somewhere.
Some bad memories of this state.
Yeah, exactly.
That's true. Professor, thank you very much. Professor Mark Strand, straight from Washington. Thanks a lot. See you soon.
Excellent.
We're going to watch the presidential campaign in the U.S. and hope that we're going to have a chance to talk again with Professor soon.
It'll be interesting no matter what.
That's true. Ladies and gentlemen, you can join us on rackracon.com. That's our website. That's our Substack. You can leave us your email. You can, of course, and we highly recommend it, follow and subscribe also Professor Mark Strand's Substack account, which you can find either by looking for Professor Mark Strand or just putting the politics and sausage making. That's the title of this very interesting Substack blog. Ladies and gentlemen, we see each other on this program next week. Stay safe. Ciao, ciao. Bye.